The financial history of this series is actually kind of fascinating in its own right. The first film had a budget of $140 million and made $650, whereas the second film had a budget of $225 and made $1 billion. That's a gross profit of around $750 million. Pretty good. So the idea of them making the third film was pretty much guaranteed, but that's okay, since after all that was guaranteed with the first film. The first film was something of a smash success, an unexpected one at that. I mean, you're making a film about a ride at Disneyland. How could that possibly be good? Can I add something here, if I might be so bold? I don't remember if I talked about this during my Pirates of the Caribbean 1 rumination, because that was a long time ago by this point, but I like this idea. Because it's a creative challenge, and it's a fascinating one, the kind that I would love to sink my teeth into. You start with something that's very threadbare, and you're told, all right, make something good out of it. Another example of this, to use a random, kind of off-the-ball example here, would be Final Fantasy Dissidia Duodecim, the second Dissidia game. What did that use? FF1. It took the extremely plain, practically non-existent FF1 and fleshed it out considerably, adding backstory and arcs and loops and explaining several aspects of it and helping it going forwards. Similar concept. Take not quite a blank sheet of paper, but threadbare, and do something cool with it. I kind of wish that we would see more of this, if I might be so bold. Because, well, this is Hollywood, and Hollywood has been accidentally dropping my back scratcher and constantly rehashing old ideas and old concepts in their desperate bid for new movies. Constantly, right? But what they tend to do is they tend to do shot-for-shot remakes, like, Psycho, for example, or they tend to do things that's like, hey, let's do a live action of an animated thing. But making a movie based on a ride at Disneyland? Okay. Now, of course, not every single one of these is going to work out. After all, I have seen Battleship. But this film, the interesting thing here, so they actually took several efforts to make this film cheaper than it was. They filmed several aspects of it and kept the crew on and the cast on while they were filming 2, and then did an extended shot to film several things for 3. This is why I say 3 was guaranteed by 1. It's because they had signed the contract that way. They were ready to go for 3, and it was intended to be a trilogy. What I also like, though, is and obviously I haven't covered 2, but this is kind of relevant here. When they set about making 2 and 3, they were like, let's bake the whole thing into a trilogy. Let's bring the heathens gods thing in. Let's bring the curse thing in. Let's bring the magic thing in. Let's world build this sucker. And there is a surprising amount of world building lore around the Pirates series at this point, and a lot of it comes from this particular film. This film cost $300 million to make, and that may not sound like a lot, but it is. I think I have to date only covered one other film that has cost that much to make, and that's Solo. And if you remember that rumination, or if you didn't watch it, I'll just tell you very quickly, that was a hideous amount of money. And it was because they did so many reshoots and had so many overhauls and behind-the-scenes problems with regards to that film. So that was bad, and that was about this expensive. This film was just that expensive on its own. To give you another perspective, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was about this expensive. Still, this one made about, $961 million in the box office, so Lord knows they made their return on investment on that one. The intro is one of my favorite pieces of cinema ever, and I mean that with sincerity. Not the top 5, probably the top 10, though. We have... Everything's just kind of, the colors have been bleached out just a little bit. There are the prim, proper, pressed British troops. They are immaculate. They look like they have come straight off of the assembly line and straight out of the bath. Then there's the people who are not them. They are covered in rags, they are grimy, their teeth are discolored, they are misshapen, and they're being haggard and shoved together and mass hanged. Mass hanged. They are killing these people by the hundreds. There's this low drum roll in the background, and the one gentleman is reading off all of the human rights that are being temporarily suspended. because apparently the East India Trading Company has the power to do that. And also, they're killing regardless of who and what you are, regardless of gender, regardless of skin color, regardless of age. Everyone gets killed and then thrown into the piles. Then they bring the kid out and they start singing. Forgive me for being weird, but one of the things I like about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies in general, of the 4 I've seen, I still haven't seen 5 as of this moment, is that they embraced the magical side of things. Which makes sense. It's based on a ride, and the ride's about cursed skeleton people rising up and being like, yo-ho, we're pirates, right? So, okay, sure. You took it and you ran with it. But again, that's part of that world building. And with a few exceptions, they tend to follow their own rules. One of those rules is the power of, for lack of a better way to put it, curses. This is very much a rules magic kind of a thing. Something very prevalent when it comes to curses across fiction. The Witcher is probably another excellent example of this same concept. Rules magic is, imagine magic, but it's programming. If, then. Very simple. So, then they sing this song, and it's a great song. It's a brilliant song. And then they kill them. And then the whole screen goes silent. I remember being in the theaters first time I saw this, and just chills. Actual goosebumps as I'm watching this. But the best part is all of this is on purpose. Cutler Beckett is mass murdering people, or mass executing, depending on how you prefer to define that, to provoke them into calling this song. His only word to it is, finally. This is the power of Cutler Beckett. I'll be discussing him more in depth later, but one of the things that we learned from him in the second film is that he is the kind of person who... I'm trying to think of another example. It's very rare that I see this kind of person in fiction. Lex Luthor would qualify as this type of person. It's an ordinary person who bothers to understand the whys and the hows of the supernatural. And so, the ordinary person in a world of gods and monsters can nevertheless be an influential player because they know how things work and they know why things work. And they seek to understand it and they use that knowledge against them. In short, something I've talked about a lot, the masquerade concept from Harry Potter and Vampire the Masquerade and a bunch of other settings as well. That concept is threatened by people like Beckett. Because once they understand and once they comprehend, then your magic powers and your special abilities are nowhere near as powerful because we know how they work. And we can work on counteracting them and working around and through them. I hate to use this example, but another example of this would actually be the Transformers in several of its continuities, where the more open and overt the Transformers were, the more the people of Earth, humans, were more than capable of working around them, since they understood how they work, how to detect them, and how to kill them. Anyways, great stuff. Great stuff. Love this intro. Love the world building. We also see the song's connection and the power, the idea that as the song is being propelled throughout the world, people cannot help but respond to it. People cannot help but react to it. This is probably me giving the film too much credit, but towards the end of the film, there's this bit where, all the pirate lords have assembled, and the only ones that had to be specifically called were Fang, who was already kind of, in the area thanks to circumstances, Sparrow, who was dead, and of course Barbossa, who was actually dead. Everyone else was already there. The implication given is that the song was summoning them regardless. And Fang wasn't going along with it just because he was busy. Sparrow wasn't because he was in the dead. And basically the point is the only three who didn't go along with it were people who had other reasons not to. Everyone else just automatically called through and followed through on the summons. Hell, even Elizabeth is singing the song in the intro. Implications that she qualifies, magically speaking, under the rules lawyering of the laws of the rules magic as a pirate, or a poirate if you prefer. I should go ahead and define that now. So what is a pirate? A pirate is a disgusting, despicable human being who deserves to die. A poirate is Han Solo. Actually, Jack Sparrow is probably the prototypical poirate, but you've seen this before. Quite a bit of fiction when it tends to romanticize this type of person. What they are showcasing is a poirate, not a pirate. And I make the distinction very clear because pirates really are despicable, scum-sucking bastards who deserve to die. A poirate is more of someone who is a freedom lover or a rebel or, just a carouser or something like that. Again, that kind of an archetype. And Jack Sparrow is pretty much exhibit A with regards to that. I may slip up and call something pirates in this, but let's be clear. There's not a single pirate in this entire film. And that's the point. The only one who might qualify is Beckett. Moving on. So, they infiltrate. That's pretty cool. They do some good stuff there. There's also a nice little bit of early foreshadowing where there's Fang's people, and then there's Barbossa's people, and they're at each other's throats. But then they immediately, together and unified, work together to avoid the East India Trading Company troops going by. And it's like, none of these people like each other. But all of them are pretty much united against the one larger threat. A very common trope in fiction. But I'll admit one I tend to enjoy. So we'll be seeing a lot of that going forwards. We find out about a little bit about Fang. He's much like Barbossa, but absent his merciful nature and sense of fair play. I'd contest that because Barbossa is Barbossa, especially in the first film. But actually, no, I agree with that. From what we see of most of the pirates, Barbossa's leaning towards the decent side. Like if we were to be the worst and best, Barbossa's kind of over in this direction. He is still a bad person in many ways, and I don't want to dismiss that, and he is still villainous. There's a reason I tend to use him as the archetypal type 1 villain, after all. But, at the same time, he is nowhere near as bad as so many others, and the archetypal type 4 villain in the fourth film, Blackbeard, is a perfect example of how Barbossa is nowhere near as bad can get. This film does the same thing because we have the Type 3 villain in this film. You notice the pattern here yet? Type 3 villain being Beckett, of course, but I'll talk more about him later, like I said. All right, so we let's get this out of the way early. There's a lot of weird sexism in this film. I don't get it. It's uncomfortable, and it happens a lot. Sometimes it's done for just juvenile humor, which I'll talk about later. But in other cases, it's like Fang tries to force himself on Elizabeth. What? And then they force her to disrobe in order to meet him. Not fully, she's not fully naked, but she is in what is effectively a gown, or a PJ, a robe. And that's it. Why? Why? Alright, I just wanted to get that out of the way. I don't have anything else to add to it. It's one of the major detractors for the film, in my opinion. Moving on. So, I know COVID's bad, and I know everyone has to kind of stay home and, self-isolate, but I'm a little bit worried that some people are taking it too far if you've got to the point where literal barnacles are starting to grow on your skin because you've been sitting in that bathwater too long. Seriously, why would you ever do that? That's so weird and gross. How long has Will been holding his breath while he was under there? Just a random question. Anyways, Barbossa drops all the pretenses after they get around the usual range of, I know, you know, I know, you know, I know. Okay, fine. The court's being called. We need to deal with this. There's a weird amount of exposition that happens in the background in these early scenes. This film does a lot of that. Not just crucial elements like this, but there's a lot of background elements that just happen. The director likes to have the camera pan to things that aren't currently the main focus, just so other stuff can happen while that's happening. I actually kind of like the style personally, but it is kind of strange, especially in scenes like this one. The first court gave us rule of the seas, but it also gave rise to people like Beckett. And he's right. Having tamed the seas, he now tamed it for everyone, not just you and yours. And so anyone can show up who has the will and the capacity and the smarts in order to take advantage of that. And, well, there they are. So, Mercer shows up here. He's still the dog. He's still the killer that works at Beckett's employ, the dragon, if you will. Almost kills Will and or Fang before he realizes that they might be useful and decides to spare them. And kills the two Singapore women. I kind of wish we had seen some more of that. That would have been kind of cool, but I digress. So, as they're leaving... Oh, real quick. I love Marty's cannon. I know it's a reference. As they're leaving after the first big battle, and yes, I'm just going to kind of skip over. There's a lot of battles in this film. I'll talk more about that later, I swear. As they're leaving, the entire town is on fire behind them. Given that Beckett has effectively declared war on piracy as a concept. Absolutely burning an entire pirate town to the ground kind of fits with his MO. It also kind of adds to the overall theme, the reality of what's going on. One of the big elements that the director pushed for, and is very prevalent in this film, is the end of an era. And, I mean, yeah, this film is set right about when that happened, when the age of sail was kind of rounding about and doing its thing, the edges of the map closing in, etc. So this, there's a lot of tones of that, and there's just a couple of background moments like the burning town, which help to showcase that. This then immediately leads to the Flying Dutchman absolutely shrekking everything, even while massively outnumbered, and then it immediately juxtaposes that against Beckett, who is sitting quietly and working with a map. This is why Beckett is so damn terrifying. I already mentioned this. You know, his ability to acknowledge the supernatural and to work through it, with it, and around it. He wants to understand it. Once he understands the rules, then he can apply them himself. He may not have magic, but he doesn't need it. But then there's other reasons he's terrifying, too. First, he is adaptable. That's important as well. When he sees a situation, he readjusts and reapplies himself to it almost instantly. And with only one exception, he consistently manages to think of a new way to reapply the new scenario to something that benefits him and his goals. The second thing is that he holds back not at all. He is, in many ways, a complete monster. I use him as the archetypal Type 3 villain, the smug snake, if you will. But it's because he, despite having no power of himself, knows how to constantly say and do things to get others to work for him, and he just can't help himself but rub it in their faces constantly. He is smug to a T, and you can see why, since he's winning for the overwhelming majority of his screen time. Anyways, so we then it's funny, this film is kind of breakneck in its pace, but it's also not. Again, I'll come back to that later. We see the two positions that he has purchased, the loyalty, I should say, that he has purchased. The governor, over there, who is now a rubber stamp for him. You will now stamp any of these things that I push through, including these execution orders. And Admiral Norrington. Now, I'm not exactly expecting this film to adhere to realistic standards, but considering the whole seniority politics playing just the elite aristocracy club that Admiralty was at this point in history, either they just promoted him because they promoted him and he's the admiral of the East India Trading Company fleet, or, and I like this idea better, this is an emphasis on just how much influence Lord Beckett and the East India Trading Company have at this particular point in history. Anywho, note that Will's sword from the first film finally makes its way back to Norrington, and Norrington has Will's sword again. Just keep that in mind for later. Anywho, there was supposed to be a side story with the governor. Unfortunately, this is one of two plot threads that was cut from the film, which makes sense. This is an enormous film, but I think they should have been kept in. It was just going to be him discovering about the plot, about the heart, trying to look into it, failing, dying, and passing on this information. Considering how crucial this information is to how things go, I kind of wish it had been given a little more screen time. The other plot we'll get to later. So, we have a quick aside. Why can't you just resurrect Jack? Well, that's easy. Jack's not dead. I know they say Jack dies several times in this film, but actually, by all accounts, I don't think he did. Now, I know he was consumed by the Kraken and dragged down, but by my understanding of the supernatural tint of this setting and how the rules work, yes, I'd probably be a Lex here as well. I've even got the hair for it. Jack didn't die. He was dragged into hell. I don't have a better way to call it. Davy Jones's locker is probably closer to simply a subdimension, which is probably intended to be a in-between realm to allow for passing of people into a better afterlife, or is intended to be a better afterlife itself. Take your pick. There's evidence for both within what we see in this film. But since obviously he's not doing that, and he's being an evil dick about everything, it is the closest equivalent to hell. And because Jack is not simply dead, but is actually locked in a subdimension, he can't just simply be brought back like Barbossa could be. Pity. He also has a good line. There's a lot of really good lines in this film. It's not getting to the land of the dead that's hard. It's getting back. Ain't that the truth? Can I just take a quick moment to say that Bill Nighy is absolutely amazing, and I can't gush about him enough. I'm sorry. He's one of those, like, I've got a bundle of favorite actors, and Bill Nighy is in that list. Oh. Even when he's in a film I don't really like Underworld, for example, he's still Bill Nighy, so it's still awesome, right? I mean, he even had a one-off role in Doctor Who, which I really liked. Talking about Van Gogh. Anyways. So we see Jones. This is fascinating. I was actually specifically asked to comment on this because someone asked, why is Jones not like Data? Let's elaborate. Over in Star Trek, for those who don't watch that, there's a character called Data who lacks emotions. Some people dispute this. And as a consequence, he comes across as very flat. Not completely flat. It's actually harder to act emotionless than it sounds because most people just act boring. Sorry, but my mustache is just... But Data behaves in a very straight, almost robot-like way. There are mannerisms to him, but for the most part, what he comes across is very straight. Why does why does Jones, who does not have a heart, not act this way? Because this, even though it is literally his physical heart, what we are seeing here and what we are shown is something closer to the classic term, heartless. Now, this is once again how we get into the curse and magic nature of this setting. Because by virtue of being heartless, he has not lost all his emotions. He's only lost his good ones. Now, I want you to picture that for a moment. I want you to picture that happiness, enjoyment, and laughter and love and all of the things that you would consider good emotions are just gone. You still feel. What kind of person would you be like under those circumstances? If you pay attention, especially in the second film, but this shows up many times in the third film, Jones goes out of his way to be cruel when he could otherwise just win. Like, Davy Jones is the single most terrifying thing in the setting so far of everything I've seen. Again, haven't seen the fifth film, and the sixth film hasn't even, we don't even have a release date or a title for that film yet, assuming that's even going to be made at this point. But as of this moment, and this also includes the books and some of the side stuff with the games, Davy Jones is still the most terrifying thing wandering around this setting. When he says he is the sea, he is barely exaggerating there. He is an unstoppable monster who has a degree of control over the ocean itself and commands a ship almost literally telepathically that has the ability to withstand virtually any damage and be submersible and can teleport to the land of the dead and has his own subplane, and you get the point. He is tremendously powerful, and this film goes out of its way regularly to reemphasize how much of a juggernaut he really is. That's also important, too, because despite the stakes and everything, the overall presence of the magical elements of this film are relatively low. Thus, Jones himself sits much higher than everyone else. He is the shark, and everyone else is the fish, with one notable exception. This is something I've talked about recently, too, since I recently, just a couple weeks ago, actually covered Star Wars Rogue One, and I talked about Krennics. Jones isn't a Krennic. Jones is a Darth Vader. Probably worse, actually, because Jones can literally, teleport and regenerate and all that fun, horrible, horrible stuff. Anywho, but getting back to the Heartless thing. All of that is his aspect of power, but despite the fact that he has all this power, he constantly goes out of his way to make things worse for people. Why? Negative emotions. Heartless. Again, in the classical sense of the word, not the literal sense of the word. There is a malevolence, malice, and I don't know what else to say, a cruelty to how he operates and to how he functions. And even when he is in his malaise and despair, in his grief, which are things he feels as well, all of that is stuff that he just endures and moves forward with. I am the sea. But then, he's playing at his organ, and he hears the song being played by his version of the Locket. And it is his song, it's his theme song from the second film. And as he's listening to it, a smile crosses his lips, a positive emotion. And that brings along with it that grief of sadness, that heartbreak. Heartbreak being a unique emotion since it's actually in between the two. The implication here, stated several times throughout the film and shown, is that even though he has lost all his positive emotions, he has also lost the in-between ones as well, because he can't have the in-between, he can only have the bad. This means while he is a monstrous, horrible person, he doesn't feel the kind of pain that he otherwise would, like heartbreak. So he sees the tear, and he is enraged, furious that they dare to bring this thing. How dare you? I've already had to do all this crap and all this nonsense just for you. I had to kill my own Kraken just for you. And now you dare to take that thing and get off, all of you. Bill Nye has a very unique way of speaking in this film. It's good stuff. This is one of Beckett's very few mistakes, and he ends up paying for this. He's trying to pressure Jones into behaving, so he decides to bring the heart on board. The problem is, I don't think Beckett knew what the heart would do to Jones. Beckett can only operate from what he understands and knows, since that's the whole point, right? He learns the supernatural. And since the heart is now making him more emotional, Jones is now feeling the full array of emotions, good, bad, and in between. And that makes him much more unstable. You'll notice that Jones was something of a consistently persistent, advancing wall in the second film. He's far more emotionally unstable, and far more terrifying in the third film. And this is exactly why, because he is in the presence of his own heart for so much of the film's runtime. Sorry, next page. I got like 5 pages of notes. So we arguably see our first glimpse of the real Barbossa in this film, too. I don't mean like a good person or anything like that. I mean, he's like, hey, so we need to get lost and we need to go to the land of the dead. He is confident, he is unafraid, and he is crazy. He is laughing as they go over the waterfall. That is Barbossa right there. And we'll see more of him in the future. And at about 32 minutes into the film, Jack Sparrow shows up. That was a long film, my goodness. Now, okay. On the one hand, I think the portrayal of hell is awesome. Let's think about this for a moment. This sequence of scenes, which is actually reasonably long, this is like a huge chunk of the film where the pacing just screeches to a halt. This sequence of events here shows how much Jack has completely lost it. And it does a good job of it. This is a man who is not crazy. He is insane. He is cracked. And the film shows this in many ways. How I hate to praise the acting of Johnny Depp, but Johnny Depp absolutely nails the manic desperation as he's going through this, as he's dealing with this. Like when he's pulling on the boat with just this almost dead-eyed expression of this has to happen because it's the only option. What else are you going to do? And of course, I've actually been here, by the way. Bonneville, I think, something like that. It's in Ohio? It's the Salt Flats. No, it's Utah. Sorry, it's Salt Flats. I've actually been to where they filmed this. I was driving through there with my mom one time. But anyways, very visually impressive. And of course, it does a very good job of getting across the idea of the perfect hell for Jack Sparrow, or indeed anybody of the sea. A massive expanse of salt and sand, and no wind, and no water, and no nothing. And that may not sound like hell, to which I invite you to just hang out there for a couple of days or years or millennia, and you might change your mind a little bit. I find myself wondering every time I see this film, how many other people are trapped down in Davy Jones's locker? How many other people have pissed him off enough that he has consigned them to that hell of Utah? So, that being said... Oh, wait, one more thing. Got to comment on this. Once again, cruelty. Back in the first film, what the pearl is ships and mast and things. No, that's what makes up a ship. What a ship is. What the pearl really is freedom. To Jack Sparrow, the pearl has always been a very personal and very intimate expression and showcasing of freedom, of the thing he desires most in his life. And he has the pearl, and he can't move it, and he can't do anything with it. You're free. Enjoy. Cruelty. But for all that praise, It's weird and creepy. I feel like these scenes go on way too long, and they try to be quirky and wacky in places where I don't think they were necessary. I think a good editing pass on this entire sequence of scenes would have improved it substantially. Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? So, the ship gets crabbed. Is that a verb now? The ship gets calypsoed? I don't know. To the shore. Okay, cool. So that is a lot of crabs. And we have to sparrow for a little bit. I don't have much to say about this scene, although it is interesting to see how Barbossa automatically presumes ownership of the pearl. Now, we know why Jack is so possessive of the pearl. Freedom, I just talked about that. Why is Barbossa? Well, because Barbossa was captain of his ship for 8 years. That was his flagship. That was his ship, which he knew inside and out with great deal of experience. So, yeah, of course he automatically assumes it's his ship. It kind of is. It's also why Barbossa so automatically tends to take command at multiple points in this film. This is something that will actually show up in the 4th film as well, because Barbossa is kind of a natural captain. Pirate captain. Either way, so of course the compass doesn't work in the locker. I mean, why would it? And look at my notes here. They get back to the ship. They glare at Pintel. Can I go ahead and say, there's a lot of attempts at humor in this film. The only ones that really land for me tend to revolve around Pintel and Righetti, because they're amusing. There's 2 other people, the British people later, who tend to work for me as well. But those two work for me pretty consistently. We have some relationship drama. I do like how the issue he has is not that she she tried to have Jack killed or that it was a horrible act. The thing that bothers her is, of course, that she did it, so guilt. The thing that bothers him is that she didn't tell him about it. This is, of course, ironic since he is also keeping something from her. But this is the only real wedge between their relationship, actually, at least since the end of the first film. So, that's neat. I'll talk more about them later. Jack tends to come across as somewhat more villainous in the next several scenes, by the way, and I wanted to comment on that briefly because it makes perfect sense. I don't like it, but it does make perfect sense. In addition to the fact that he is quite mad at this point in his life, he also literally is escaping from hell. That'd probably do a ringer on most people, and Jack's not exactly that good of a person. Good heart, really, but either way. The Barbossa, the experienced captain, takes command, and they try to head out, and they sail out. And, I have a note here about Jones being the biggest, baddest thing roaming in the setting, which I stand by. And there's dead people. Lots and lots and lots of dead people. Because lots of people are dying right now at sea, and honestly, that's probably normal. That is Jones's job, which he is not doing. Notice how upset Calypso is over this, because, that was the whole point, is that she assigned him that task, to shepherd those souls to the other side. What really makes it horrible, though, and this is where, this film has some really great visual and audio design, by the way, which I absolutely praise, and I want to heap even more praise upon. There's a great scene where there's a bunch of people, and they're just in boats. They're just sitting there, quietly contemplative. It takes repeated yells for Elizabeth to get the attention of her father. And it's probably only the fact that it's her that he notices her. We would only appear as ghosts to them. There's a lot of one-line tidbits of world building in this that actually help to flesh out how the world works quite well. Like I said, really surprisingly good world building in this one. The only reason he notices her is because she's his daughter. And there's a good chance he doesn't notice anyone else in the ship. Instead, he just processes that she's there. He then finishes his arc, and he gets across the Exposition. But the way he says it is beautiful. Are you dead? No. I think I am. And the fact that he's so uncertain about that. There's the concept of a lost soul. Someone who is damaged, to their memory and their feeling and their sense of self has been injured by the violence and brutality of their death. These are kind of souls that you need to be shepherded and taken care of and carefully managed and moved over to the afterlife. And instead they're just sitting here on boats trying to figure it out for themselves, or failing completely, or not doing anything at all. And thus we can see part of why Calypso's so damned pissed about all this. I mean, I would be too. And I'm not a sea goddess that you know of. So, this is when you find out about the curse of the heart. Will takes that in, and so does Jack, of course. Both of them are thinking in their own directions. And again, a very brief scene that gets across a lot in a very simple thing. As Elizabeth is mourning, Will simply turns to Tia Dalma, Calypso, and says, "Is there a way?" To which she responds, "He's at peace." 2 sentences get across so much. This also implies quite a bit that Barbossa was not. And it is implied that simply by interacting with Elizabeth, that he was then put to peace so that he could not be resurrected. How's that for twisting the knife? Then, all right, I've been kind of hinting at it several times. Yeah, so tone, pacing, humor. Let me ask you a question. I wanted to wait until I was at least partially into this rumination to ask you this question. Do you like this film? If you look up reviews of it, they're generally negative. They're certainly on the lower end of the scale, and they're much lower than the second film or the first one. Now, this is one of those situations, I've talked about this before, that was kind of news to me, because I love this film. And when I've actually seen this film multiple times in the theater, because I loved it so much. So when I found out that the general aggregate consensus was that this was a bad film, it was one of those, wait, it is? This has only happened a couple times in my life, but this has happened a few times where I'm like, wait, what? Really? And it's always strange to me to see that the general consensus is so against what I tend to think. No hipster intended comment. It's one of those things that makes me go, wait, why? So, if you are one of those people who do not like this film, may I ask why? You can go ahead and pause if you'd like, because I'm about to answer my own question. I like to parallel this film to another third film in a trilogy, Revenge of the Sith. Now, I like Revenge of the Sith. In fact, I love it. It's my favorite of the prequel films. It's probably also the only prequel film I like, if I'm being completely honest with myself. But the fact remains, I do like that film substantially. I would put that film at better than A New Hope. I've said that before, and I stand by it. However, it's because the good outweighs the bad. The bad is there, and there's this constant problem with Revenge of the Sith where it's like, awesome moment, stupid moment. Awesome moment, stupid moment. And now you see why I'm bringing that up. This film has really bad tonal whiplash issues. Several films, including the one I just covered a couple weeks ago, Rogue One, know how to inject moments of levity in order to keep a dark film working. And this is a pretty dark film. Mass murder and end of an era and horrific manipulation and very specific character drama and love and tragedy and all these dark, emotional, adult topics. We need some way to flesh that out. But instead of going for something like the light injections of the moments, instead it just whiplashes back and forth between being a Looney Tunes cartoon, and I do mean that as an insult, by the way, and then being a serious drama piece. And it doesn't gel. It doesn't pull off the Yakuza feel, which could have worked in this case, but it just doesn't for me. That is just my opinion. The second thing, of course, is related to the first, the humor. As I mentioned earlier, Pentel and Righetti work for me, as well as... I wrote down their names. What's their names? Hang on. Oh my god, how many pages of thing do I have here? Please tell me I wrote down their names. There it is. Murtaugh and Murtaugh? Oh, Mulrog and Murtaugh. Sorry, Mulrog and Murtaugh. They're cool. They only get like 2 scenes, but they're cool. But almost every other joke in this entire film falls flat for me, and I can pinpoint exactly why, because it's juvenile humor. Now, no offense intended to anybody who likes juvenile humor. Everyone likes their own kind of humor. But it feels very strongly like the desire was to make this big, epic, serious drama piece, and somewheres said, well, hang on, we need this to have broader appeal. And broad appeal usually means lowest common denominator, and when it comes to humor, that almost always means juvenile humor. And here we are. So these moments just completely kill the tone and the humor of the film, and that's directly related to the pacing. Now, this is the trickier one, although this is also the easiest one to fix. Like I said, this film needs an editing pass. There's a concept I run into a lot. This is mostly a video gaming concept, but films can have this issue as well. Imagine a video game where you have to loot a lot, like Borderlands or something, right? Now imagine that looting takes a second and a half of you holding down a button, okay? Picture that for a moment. Now, why is this significant? You're like, it's a second and a half, Lord. Who gives a damn? Now do that for every single time you loot for a 60-hour game. And you see the point. Now, looting is just one example. There's a lot of games that do this, where they inject seconds into actions so that something that should take this much time instead takes this much time. And it's all little, but it's constant. And because it's so constant, it stretches the whole work out. And it is a form of padding. It's just a very unique and horrible form of padding, especially given how avoidable it is. Just make the loot happen. Bam, done. And now that padding is gone. Just to name the direct example I did. Again, a very common problem in video games, usually done on purpose to make a game longer. But this film has that problem. There are many scenes, where the scene could have been 2 minutes shorter, 3. In some cases, it could have been half the length that it actually was. And there's a lot of time spent on unnecessary shots or unnecessarily taking their time with certain concepts. And just each scene, it feels like they refuse to cut it down. And so instead, it just kind of stretches out in the exact same manner I just described. This is what really drags the film down for me. I can ignore the juvenile humor, and I do. I just mentally eject it. And the tonal whiplash, I tend to just mentally eject those scenes from the film. So, okay, not really a huge issue. But the padding problem, I can't really get rid of that unless I literally pulled in a thing, dragged this into Adobe Pro, or Premiere Pro, and just started editing out the seconds that don't need to be there. The scene where they flip the ship over is a perfect example that that scene did not need to be nearly as long as it was. To name just one example. Having given my 3 theories on this film and why people don't like this film, again, I am now curious what your thoughts are, having just heard my own. Because all of this absolutely drags the film down for me. If I was to review this film alongside Pirates 1, obviously this is not a review, but I could say right now that Pirates would have less negatives, but Pirates 3 would have more positives. Now, they get out. Also, real quick, I know this whole series has always just been kind of, flipping the bird at physics, but they tilt the boat. Anyways, so they get out. Barbossa pulls his gun first because he wants to force Jack to go to the court. Jack shoots first. Again, mad, just escaped from hell. Then they see the Kraken. This again makes my point. Much of that earlier scene of flipping the boat, honestly, you could eject most of that scene and I think it would work better. But this scene is powerful and emotional and great. It is a literal visual representation of civilization overtaking the monstrous and magical world. The Kraken, the terror of the seas, is dead at the hands of a dude who has no powers and no nothing. But he knew how to manipulate the situation. That's awesome. That is a powerful moment. And the scene when Barbossa and Sparrow both debate this gets across all the impact it needs to. It helps that both actors work really well off of each other. Great chemistry there. Hector! Also, I mentioned that there's 2 things that made me laugh. There's one other thing that made me laugh in this whole film, and I even bothered to write it down here so I wouldn't forget it, because obviously I did, because I just mentioned it. Did no one come to save me just because they missed me? And like all of the others kind of, raise their hand and say, I'm going to go stand with them. That got me. You're with me. Let's talk Cutler Beckett. I've already described much of why Cutler Beckett is the archetypal Type 3 villain. The smart person who doesn't have special powers or doesn't have mega abilities and can't move buildings and doesn't have command of the sea or a submersible ship, but nevertheless tends to be on top and tends to be massively smug about it. He is the manipulator and the schemer. Back in the day, Jack actually ended up working with Beckett and did quite a bit of stuff for him. There was a falling out, which I'll discuss in a moment. Beckett ended up branding him a pirate. That's where he gets the brand. And the Black Pearl was burnt and sunk. Jack went down with the Pearl and tried to, in his manic desperation, to save freedom. Again, that whole intimate personal thing. He effectively died. Whether he literally died or not is something that is more debatable, but either way, he was found by Jones. Jones raised the pearl for him and gave him the time at the helm in exchange for his soul later, and that was the bargain that comes up in 2 and is also relevant in 3. Now, just quick and dirty, in case you didn't know any of that backstory, it's hinted pretty well at in this. Like I said, very, very quick and efficient world building, which is funny how wonderfully well-paced this is compared to the problem I just mentioned. But anyways, Beckett and Jack are very, very similar people. I'm gonna be looking at my notes a lot here because I don't want to skip over this. This is important that I get this across perfectly. Both are schemers. Both are manipulative. Both are weak, relatively speaking. Decent in a sword fight. Decent in anything. No special powers. No great fleets. No nothing. They're just people. They are adaptable. Both of them prefer to make deals. This is consistent. Both of them tend to operate by saying, well, I'll give this to you and you give this to me. And they tend to act more as traders than they do as anything else. They maneuver their way through people who are much stronger than them. Both men have managed to outmaneuver and outflank the literal giants and the metaphorical giants of the naval world, Jones himself being the biggest one. Note that both of these people have actually managed to outmaneuver and outflank Jones more than once. Beckett, see, here's the thing though, so they are very similar. They're very similar in their mindset, they're similar in their attitude, they're similar in their approach, their style, their modus operandi. How are they different? Well, Beckett speaks very crisply. He enunciates his words very carefully, and he tries to make certain to present himself very, very pressed clothes, very clean. He wears a wig. Funny little tidbit. I actually believe this is on purpose. If you pay attention to the close shots, Tom Hollander, I think is his name, the actor who plays him, has a very obvious large, I forget what it's actually called. It's visible where he is shaven, where his beard would be if he didn't shave. And it gives him a bit of a baby face, but it also kind of makes it so he looks very clean shaven and crisp. But it's such a large mass of his face that you can tell this is the kind of person who would have a big scraggly old beard if he let it grow, which he doesn't, because that's not the kind of person he presents himself as. By contrast, Sparrow has a scar right here on his chin. How many of you noticed that? I notice it every time I look at him. Scraggly beard, extremely scraggly hair, which is actually a wig, but whatever. Probably smells terrible. Is more or less literally wearing rags. His hat is a piece of junk. And he goes out of his way to constantly speak and I can't do it. I can't do it. He speaks slurred. He actually kind of, I can't do it like he does it. He literally slurs his words as he is speaking. The exact opposite of enunciation. Despite the fact that, again, both men are very smart and know exactly how to read a situation very quickly and maneuver their way through it. How many times does Sparrow casually speak in Latin accurately just in this film? Now, you're probably thinking, oh, okay, so that's how they're different. Not quite. See, the thing is, while they are very, very, very similar men, the surface differences are inconsequential. It is the core that really changes the variance between these two men, because Jack Sparrow is a good person, and Beckett is a complete monster. Slaves are not cargo, mate. I think I'm actually misquoting. I think it's people ain't cargo, I believe is the exact quote. That was the thing that caused the falling out. Jack refused to haul slaves. Beckett was a slave runner. Now, I could point to all the other horrible, horrible things Beckett does, but I don't think I need to, do I? You see, Beckett is a completely... I don't know if he's literally a sociopath, but he's certainly leaning in that direction. He does not give a damn. In many ways, he reminds me of Heath Ledger's The Joker, in that he is absolutely willing to do anything to accomplish his ends. He doesn't hold back at all, and he doesn't care about anything except for himself and his goals. Everything else is expendable. He shows this in this very scene, although this is a sin, where he makes a deal with full intent to break it 3 times in a row with Sparrow. By contrast, Sparrow doesn't and isn't. So, Fang betrays Will, and then Mercer betrays Fang, And then Fang presumes Elizabeth, so Barbossa uses the presumption of Elizabeth against Fang. And then Beckett implies the compass only works for Sparrow, which is funny because that's a debatable thing and probably not true, since later Will has no problem using it. Although it was actually given to Will rather than taken, so that might be relevant. Either way, and then Norrington shows up, puts 2 and 2 together very quickly. I have a note right here, and it just says the word icky. I was going to mention it here, but I already mentioned it earlier. What is with the weird things against Elizabeth in this film? It's really awkward and uncomfortable. It's another thing that I would completely eject if I could, and might also be related to why some people don't like this film. No judgment, I get you. Again, more positives, more negatives. Skarsgård's a good actor too. He does a disturbingly good job of the mentally destroyed Bootstrap Turner. I'm going to call him Bootstrap to be clear, because I call him Bill and Will, but honestly, it's a lot easier to say Bootstrap to audibly distinguish the two. Anyways, he comes out and he's like, "Oh, Elizabeth, you're here and it's cool. Let me get across some exposition. Okay, let me go back into being part of the ship and part of the crew." And then she's like, "Are you okay?" And he goes and he mentally resets. And it's honestly disturbing the way they showcase this. Maybe I'm just bothered by that because I've actually seen people go through that in real life. These sequences of scenes also do a good job of getting across the idea of tiers of evil, for lack of a better way to put that. This is something that fiction does a lot. I may be someone who robs people, but I'm not a mass murderer. You know, tiers of how bad it is. This actually came up with a film I just recorded a few days ago that went live like 6 months ago, Princess Mononoke, where we see the distinction between someone like Gonza, who is not a good person, and the actual villains of that film, who are much, much worse. And we see the same thing here. And at every turn, Beckett consistently is the worst person in the setting. He's even the final boss, if you're paying attention. Even though Davy Jones is the most powerful being in the setting, at least of the ones we're shown. Anyways, so Beckett assumes Jack is helping them out, but no, it's actually Will. Will says a thing that is interesting to me. When Jack says, "Why don't you just go ahead and let me stab the heart? I'll take over the job. I'll be the new captain of the Dutchman." Will automatically says, "But you've got to do the job." That says so much about Will's mentality right there, that there's just a sense, a kernel of responsibility in him, that it's the first thing that occurs to him. Now, he does mention the tentacly thing, and Jack is like, "Well, I could kind of live with the tentacles if I had to for eternal life, but Either way, Will gets knocked off. And then Norrington shows up. Allow me to say that I like Norrington a lot better in 2 and 3 than I did in 1. He actually has a very solid and complete character arc from 2 to 3. It's just it kind of crops up periodically, which kind of hurts it, admittedly. I mentioned another character thread that was axed from this film that could have been put back in place of all the padding I mentioned earlier. So axe all the padding and put back in the governor thing, the Norrington thing. Norrington was supposed to have more scenes with Jones, where the two had not quite a friendship, but we're certainly getting a mutual respect for each other, almost entirely based on how much both of them can't stand Beckett. This is actually why in the film that when Norrington dies, oh, by the way, another example and sign of just how bad Bootstrap's getting is that he's practically just a mindless slave at this point and can't even really think for himself. But when he is killed and when he frees them, we find out that this is why Jones offers him to join the crew rather than just straight up being like, eh. And now Will's sword passes on to Jones. Well, that sword just keeps getting around from the first movie, doesn't it? Looking at my notes here. There's this bit where she says, "Come with me, Norrington," and "Come with me, James," actually, is what she says. Can I just say I think Norrington would have actually made an excellent pirate captain? No, really. He has the mentality, he has the mental acumen, the skill, the adaptability. We kind of see him operate as one in the second film. And, I don't know, I think he would have been a really good foil, since he would probably be more of a positively inclined pirate. I screwed that up. Inclined pirate. And thus someone who, well, we need more of in this kind of film. But anyways. So, moving on. There's a scene It's a really, really good scene. But first, before that, we have a scene where they're approaching Shipwreck Cove, and Barbossa has this big old ring. It's a lot bigger than mine here, but it's kind of resting up here-ish. And Tia Dalma, Calypso, grabs his hand, and his hand skeletizes, and the ring actually slips down because it no longer has the skin keeping it there, which is a nice touch. You'll notice this is the first scene in the entire film where he actually loses his cool, where he actually gets legitimately upset and angry and throws her down in the brig because screw this and screw you, how dare you. That's brilliant. He has a bit of a character arc too, I talked about that. He will talk about it more overtly later, but I like these early signs of it. I'll go ahead and tell you it right now, because that's my job. He's sick of it. He's sick of other people controlling his life and controlling his fate. I decide where I go and what I do. That's actually why he became a captain in his backstory. A pirate captain, rather than just an honest merchant or whatever. He wanted to control his own life. Remember, a pirate is far more about freedom than they are evil. And that is one of the main points of this entire trilogy. This then leads to my favorite scene in the entire film. Calypso is down on the deck, and Davy Jones shows up. Oh, this scene is poetry. I don't even know where to start. First of all, Bill Nighy nails it. The two musical pieces that both of them kept because both of them cared. I'm going to go ahead and admit something here. Oh, wait, hang on. Am I cutting ahead? I actually am cutting ahead. Whoops. That's okay. I can switch back. Sorry. I have so many pages of notes on this frickin' movie. It's a long movie. I'm going to keep talking about it. Because during this scene, I know I have a reputation for being anti-romance, which is actually untrue. I'm just anti-bad writing, and it tends to irritate me more when I see it in romance than in other aspects of narrative. I really like the tragic love story of Calypso and Davy Jones. I do. Now, it's not what I would call the most heartwarming story ever, but you can tell that the two legitimately cared about each other, and the two still have this connection despite everything that's happened. If for nothing else, the fact that both of them still have the lockets. He walks in, and they confront each other, and for the first time in many years, he actually flat out asks the question that's probably been burning for him ever since he got his heart back. Why? Why did you do it? Why weren't you there? I actually did a little looking into this. The answer isn't given in the movie unless you take her answer at front value. It's in my nature. Would you like me if I was anything else than I am? But there has been some theory crafting and some differing of opinions about the real reason why she decided not to be there for him. By some accounts, this actually happened more than once, by the way. He went off for 10 years, came back, she wasn't there. He went off for another 10 years, came back, she still wasn't there. And this is what drove him so far and drove him to feel so betrayed, because she wasn't doing this. Now, some accounts say that she was being capricious, and, well, Calypso is kind of evil if we're just being 100% honest about ourselves. She is, after all, supposed to be a sea goddess, and we know how wonderful the sea can be, as usually portrayed in fiction. So, that tracks. But the other answer, and this is kind of funny to me, is that she was afraid. That she was so terrified that if she was there for him, that he would no longer love her. That's so Greek, isn't it? Oh. And his hand, she reaches out. Notice, so I mentioned she's evil, and I stand by that statement. Feel free to disagree in the comments below, but she reaches, and she sounds so possessive. The actress does a great job. This should have always been mine, as she reaches out to him. And we see Davy Jones, as he technically should be without the curse. And notice as he runs a hand down her face, fondly, he's still doing it like he's the crab, like he can't stop because he's had the crab arm for so long. It's a nice little touch. And what's funny is she's so angry and so possessive, but when she has what she wants, she calms. The sea is fickle, after all. And if only you had heart to give. Then something interesting happens. He grabs her neck and then advances through the grate, the wall. In both of these scenes, she looks legitimately afraid of him. And she should be. Now, it could be argued whether she's stronger than him overall. But in this moment, he is absolutely stronger than her. And he could kill her if he wanted to in this exact moment, just like that. She even flat out says, "Why did you come?" And considering that he earlier flat out insisted that she be murdered, I actually think that is why he came here. That and wanting the closure. It was only when he was actually faced with her again that he realized the extent of the feelings that he is now allowed to feel again because proximity of heart. And you'll notice that he demands, the thing that allows him to keep his position is he insists on knowing what she's going to do with the Brethren Court. And she admits with a wicked smile that she is going to kill them all. But the last thing they will see in this life is they will learn how cruel I can be. Now I want you to keep that in mind for later. But it's also relevant because of something I said earlier. In many ways, Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann followed the same love story beat of Davy Jones and Calypso. The difference is obvious, but you'll notice that both of them were keeping secrets from the other. In this case, his proviso, the thing that comforts him and allows him to relax, is knowing that his secret will be kept, that she will not know that he betrayed her. Interesting, isn't it? You'll also notice that she doesn't really give what I would consider a thorough answer to why she betrayed him. Interesting, isn't it? Brilliant scene. When I first bought the DVD for this, I actually rewatched this scene several times because I love that scene so much. Anyways, meanwhile, in the past, we have the Brethren Court get together. There is a massive amount of world building in a very short amount of time. I'm not going to run all of it through. This is already probably too long of a rumination. But really quick, Barbossa is the captain of the Caspian Sea. The Lord of the Caspian Sea. Sparrow is Lord of the Caribbean Sea. And Fang, and now Swan, was the lady of the South China Sea. And I just wanted to mention the specifics there really quick, because they did think that out. They thought about which domains each particular pirate lord had. Just a funny little thing. I love the scene where they get everything together and it's like, what, that's just a piece of junk. Well, yeah, they were actually going to bind her with 9 pieces of 8, but they were skinned broke, so they couldn't do that. So change the name. What? To 9 pieces of whatever we happen to have in our pocket at the time? Oh yeah, that's very piratey. Okay, we're up to 4 things that made me laugh. I'll give you that. We see another peek into the real Barbossa here. This is the 3rd time, I believe, now. We need to not make bargains with eldritch creatures, or to constantly have someone who is at our beck and call, or excuse me, that we are at the beck and call of. In other words, it's going back to that whole self-determination thing. By the sweat of our backs, we should actually be able to accomplish what we want. And I'm actually kind of with that because I totally believe that myself, if I might be so bold. I'm not the kind of person who would make a deal with a Loa, to put it into such terminology. But, and Calypso's totally a Loa, by the way. Of probably just 1 C, if I'm being honest. But anyways. So, then, what? Oh, yeah. What ensues is probably my 3rd least favorite scene in the film. The movie just stops dead while Teague, aka Keith Richards, shows up. Like, the pacing, the tone, the tempo, everything just grinds to a halt. And everyone winks at the camera. Sea turtles, mate. Yeah, sea turtles. And just, the whole thing feels very pandery. It's another scene I would eject entirely or chop down to substantially shorter, because the whole movie just grinds to a halt. As I'm talking this out, I can see why people don't like this film. It's just, ugh. Odd note. Every single person of the main characters at this point is wheeling and dealing and manipulating and lying and deceiving, with one exception. The one person who learned her lesson, the one person who is no longer trying to deceive anyone else, and I've already given away by mere virtue of the gender, is Elizabeth. She is quite overtly and openly saying, we need to fight for freedom. This is my agenda. This is what I'm doing. And the only thing that's close to a manipulation she does is she arranges for Jack to get over onto the Dutchman so that he can be in position to help. We need to trust Jack, right? We need to give him time for this. Which is funny because when we cut back over to Jack, sorry to skip ahead a little bit, on the Dutchman, he is completely losing his mind again, which makes sense. He escaped from hell and is now in prison in the care of the devil, relative equivalency. Yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. I hope none of you do. The idea of something you fear more than anything else, but then you're okay, you've escaped it, and it's all good. And then you go back. That is a horrific feeling. I'm amazed he was as sane as he was. And you notice he just keeps chanting to himself, saved by the will, saved by the will, saved by the will. Because it's the only way he can keep his mind going and his sanity functioning at all. Anyways, that skips ahead quite a bit. Let's rewind a little bit. So, the problems of a simple majority of a vote. If there's 10 people in a room, and 2 people vote for one person, and everyone else votes for one person, then guess who wins? Sorry, I've spent quite a bit of time little over a year ago, and recently studying voting methods because states building, and yeah, not a fan of the system, if I might be so bold. First past the post can go to hell. So, then there's the Armada. Wow, that is a lot of ships. How much money did you burn on this endeavor? Good God. So, look in my notes here. Too long my fate hasn't been my own hands, says Barbossa. Another emphasis on that. And hang on, we need to have a joke about how Barbossa doesn't know how to talk to a lover. Okay, got that out of the way. And then Will saves all of their lives by being honest, funnily enough. Because we already know her plan. She was going to brutally, horrifically kill them all and then go be with Jones. But as she is being released, he tells her the truth, that Jones is the one who betrayed her and entrapped her. And that means when she gets out of it, she decides not to help Jones, but not to help anyone. She just kind of decides to be neutral and level the playing field, which, yeah, because otherwise this would have probably gone very, very badly. She also says something. What does she say? It depends on who you ask. And apparently it also depends on the language you're watching, as in the different language releases of this film all have her saying something different. You can look it up if you want. I'm not into repeating cussing like that, but yeah. So this leads to a nice scene. Jones sees the storm and realizes that it's Calypso and that she's free. And he's relaxed and at peace, and he closes his eyes and embraces the rain, and then the realization hits, and he realizes what's happened, and he knows that she knows, and then all he feels is fury. Jones acts interestingly in this final sequence here. His cruelty is dialed up to 11, and he goes out of his way to inflict as much harm and pain as he can, despite his close proximity to the heart. One of the concepts I talk about a lot is the concept of a core. I talked about that with Rogue One, I talked about that with Fight Club, and I talk about that with a whole lot of things because I believe in this concept in real life. If you rip out the core, no. The core is what you care about most. No, that's the wrong way to put it. It's the reason you keep bothering, is the simplest way to put that, right? You know, your car breaks down, or your leg gets chopped off, or your parents die. Why do you keep going? There has to be a why there. And most people, they either keep going because of momentum, or because they have a core. You keep going because you still care about your career or your family or your children or whatever. There's something that is central to you. Not everyone has a core, and not everyone's core always stays the same. Sometimes we lose our cores. Sometimes we gain new ones, right? Jones had a core. He lost it, and he roamed around causing misery for untold decades until this film, when he got his core back. My heart will always belong to you. So when he turns his face to the skies, he believes that he is finally going to have his purpose and his joy and his life and his core back. Oh, nope. So now he's a much, much more dangerous of a person because now he's unhinged. He has effectively gone around the bend, for lack of a better way to put it. He lost his core, and now he doesn't have a core, but his heart's right over there. In other words, he still feels it. That's the problem. Because the reason he endured for all those decades or centuries, or however long it actually has been, was because he didn't have his heart. So he didn't have to feel the heartache. He didn't have to feel the loss. He didn't have to feel all those in-between emotions. They were gone. Purged. It's probably why he ripped out his heart. Now he has to feel all of that. And that's so much worse. Not to sympathize with him, but... yeah. So the final battle starts. There's actually not a lot to talk about with regards to the final battle. Looking at my notes here. Elizabeth Swann, she gives us a pretty tepid speech that I don't actually like, to be completely honest with you. But the music helps it. There's great music in this film. And it's bolstered by the fact that I agree with the message. Freedom. Choice. Okay, so we're going to die on our feet rather than die on our knees. That is really what it boils down to. And that's how she gets everyone on her side with this one. She even specifically reaches out to Barbossa in the speech. Barbossa is flexing his hand as he considers and decides, okay, screw it. This may not lead to a good end, but at least I will be leading me there. And that really is the core message. This is why Barbossa is in many ways so central to the theme of the films. Because his whole shtick is that freedom of choice, that will, which Sparrow also embodies, by the way. The Poirot ideal of having that kind of freedom and having that kind of choice, that will to drive you forward rather than being shackled or enslaved or imprisoned or forced or whatever. So he takes the wheel. This is when Murtaugh and Mulrug show up. Mulrug? And they're great. I don't have anything else to add to that. Mercer dies horrifically. Oh my god. Ooh. I mean, he deserved it, but wow. But yeah, we have the big battle between the ghost ship and the sea. So that's cute. But the funny thing is, I just finished talking about that big thing about freedom and will, and he mentions that his freedom was forfeit long ago. There's an anger behind that, but there's also a weird, enraged acceptance. Some people go through hell, metaphorically, and come out of it with the best of themselves. They aspire to be better people. Some people go through hell, metaphorically, and come out with the worst of themselves. They are vengeful and bitter and angry, and they want others to hurt, because they hurt. That's Jones. In this moment, like I said, unhinged, in this moment, he has lost everything and he does not care anymore. He is going to hurt and destroy and torture his way across the seas, and they're going to feel that wrath. My freedom was forfeit long ago. Screw it. And you notice how once again the villains kind of mirror the good guys, just with a different tint. So, this is a good time as any to mention that I actually like Will Turner and Elizabeth as a romantic pairing. I feel like they don't do enough to really earn it, and they spend a little bit too much time focusing on the artificial drama of the two misinterpreting each other, because fiction. But the two work well enough together, and the two as a legitimate pairing actually work too. The idea that they are actually loyal and actually faithful to each other is something I'm totally down for. She does canonically wait the 10 years after all, although even that's kind of questionable, but I'll cover that last. Do we have to spend like 10 minutes having them get married on the ship, though? I know that's an exaggeration, but it certainly feels that way. Jones plays with everyone here. Like I said, the cruelty's dialed up to 11. He could just win effortlessly, but he doesn't. I mean, why would he? What's the point in just winning? He doesn't care about that anymore. He doesn't care about anything anymore. But he can hurt them. He can hurt them. And they're going to hurt. And he goes out of his way to twist the knife. Literally, actually. This leads to a brilliant scene. So, Bootstrap attacks him. Another sign of how far gone he is, by the way. Bootstrap attacks, Will. Let me be clear about that. Will defeats him. Will is on the ground. Elizabeth's there. Sparrow's there. And he notices, Jones notices the love, the dreadful bond. Now, one of the key hallmarks of Sparrow and Beckett both is that they both can dance around the sharks and manage to win. What happens here is that Sparrow has Davy Jones's heart in his hand. And Davy Jones decides to basically to call his bluff. To say, no, okay, I'm going to go ahead and kill him. And this, more than anything else, gets across that cruelty and that spite I just referenced. Because he knows that Sparrow could actually kill him right there. He's got the broken hilt and he's got the heart. Dead, right? But he doesn't care anymore. But, while I'm on my way out, I could cause one last hurt and sever that love that I don't get to have anymore, that was ripped from me, that was torn from me. And you get the spite as he literally shoves the sword as far into him as he can and then literally twists it. Sparrow's Elizabeth's reaction is obvious, but you notice Jack's reaction is just... Because not only does he obviously care about Will, but this is the first time, really, that he has danced with the sharks and lost. Just straight up lost, and he knows it. And as he looks around trying to process what to do, he realizes that victory has been pulled from him, and he doesn't have a wind condition anymore. Until he comes up with it, and he allows Will to stab the heart, working through the magic, and around the magic, and in spite of the magic. I love Davy Jones's death. It's so quick. Something about that is so wonderfully appropriate to me. Maybe that's just the naval side of the family speaking there. But he dies, looks up, says Calypso, goes over the edge, and he's gone. Just gone like that. Just like would happen to someone if they went overboard in a storm at sea. They would be gone like that. And we won't see him ever again. So, the storm reclaims. The storm ends because Calypso has reclaimed what is hers, and she's done here. She moves on. Barbossa, there's a nice bit where Jack is clearly up to something because he's planned this out, obviously, and everyone's like, no, 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 and then Jack's like, no, stop, and Barbossa's like, okay, he's up to something, and decides to go along with it because he's got enough experience with Jack by this point. This then leads to the Dutchman coming up. Finally, the curse resets. Back to zero. Hasn't concluded yet, but it has reset. All the people return to something approaching normality, and the ship itself reverts to being a decent-looking ship instead of the grave ship of the dead. Or the damned, I suppose I should say. This then leads to a nice scene that I actually rather enjoy. The Endeavor, a massive man-of-war, is going between the two. And the Dutchman and the Pearl both turn on it and absolutely shred the Endeavor. Now, the Endeavor probably could have given a fight there, but there was no winning that battle. Now, this is why this is such an appropriate thing and why I bothered to mention Jack's reaction earlier, because Beckett goes through the same reaction. He has danced with the sharks, and he is lost for what is actually his only time doing so. And as you see, Beckett spends several seconds as he's processing, and you can just see him thinking, trying to find some way to think his way around or out of this. But there isn't any way. Unlike Jack earlier, who had one last card to play, Beckett has none. You'll notice that Jack's final card was to trust in a friend and give something to his friend to save his life, rather than to be selfish on the matter, and that's how he won. Beckett has no such avenue. So, as the Endeavor is destroyed, Beckett, who is a very smart person, realizes that he is lost, and just sort of walks down the staircase. So they leave. Oh, hang on. The Armada leaves. Question, why does the Armada leave? This is probably bad writing, if we're being honest. They probably wanted to race to the ending. It doesn't bother me that much because there is a reason for this to make sense. After all, that was their flagship, which was just chipper shredded by the Flying Dutchman and the Black Pearl. The Ghost Ship and the Sea. Now, they don't know the full details of what happened. They just know the Dutchman turned on them. And they know that the Dutchman can absolutely destroy other ships because it's effectively an invincible ship that is submersible that can track them anywhere. I'd probably leave too, despite the numbers advantage. Goodbye, Mrs. Turner. I like that. It's the most understated reference in the whole film. That was a good one. So, the episode ends. That's kind of it, really. Consequences of the curse. In the 5th movie, I am aware of this. The curse is kind of ended, and there's the whole Poseidon thing and blah, blah, blah. But the writers themselves and the creative staff have changed their minds multiple times over the years since this film came out about what exactly happened. When this film came out, they flat out stated, because Elizabeth was faithful, because she waited for him 10 years later with his son, then that meant the curse was concluded. Rules magic, which again is how the magic works here. If, then. And most curses usually have an out clause, some way to terminate the curse. And in this case, that makes perfect sense. So that's logical. The 5th movie may or may not contradict that, and there have been some, like I said, some people and the creative and writing staff tends to disagree on what exactly ended the curse. And then there's the 6th movie, which once again hasn't even come out yet, so I suppose we'll see whenever that comes out. Assuming it ever does at this point, because there's problems. Some dev hell going on there. This then leaves Sparrow. They took his ship again. A little nicer this time, leaving on slightly better terms. You know, he's left at a port with, money and food and women, instead of, being on a desert island with a pistol. Kind of shows a little bit of a variance there. Then, what amuses me is they actually ask for the charts. Nice little mirroring incident of the last time someone asked the captain of the Black Pearl for the charts. Equal share and all that. But of course, Sparrow already thought of that, and he goes off in his little dinghy and ends the film effectively where he began it, in that dinghy, but in a much better mood. He's got ale, he's got a location, he's got an adventure and a quest to find the Fountain of Youth. I don't know if they did that on purpose. I really don't. I actually tried to look into this, but considering so much of the creative staff changed completely with new writers and new directors from the 3rd film to the 4th, it's entirely feasible that what happened was they wanted the 3rd film to conclude in and then the adventures continue kind of a way, rather than a specific lead into a sequel kind of a way. Thus, Fountain of Youth was a nice thing to end on. It makes perfect sense. Both Barbossa and Jack wanting to live forever, given the fact that both have had brushes with death, and that's a common myth, legend, whatever you want to call it, of around that era and around that area. So, there's some logic there. And then the film ends. And that is actually the end of the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. Before I go any further, I liked the 4th film. After about 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes could be chopped out entirely. But once the film actually got going, I actually rather liked it. And again, it's probably one of my favorite examples of a Type 4 villain in Blackbeard. I am, as always, curious of your thoughts. Do you think the film should have just chopped here? Should they have made 4? Should they have made 5? I haven't seen 5, so I don't know the quality of that one. It does have Javier, one of my favorite actors. Another of my favorite actors. So many of my favorite actors in these films. As always, curious and wondering about your thoughts. I do hope you all have enjoyed. And no, I'll never cover the 2nd film. We'll see you next time. I'm kidding. It's just, yeah. Inside joke, sorry.